Hello, I'm Roman McKinnon. Welcome to our new show, SpinCheck, where we speak to politicians and candidates trying to cut through the spin. Today, we're talking to Qd Greens candidate Vinnie Batten, who is running for the key seat of Dickson. We spoke about a number of issues, including climate change, better education, and affordable housing, especially for young people. I joined him earlier from the newsroom. Vinnie Batten, welcome to 6 News and thank you for joining us.
Hey, mate. Thanks very much. Thanks for having me.
Firstly, can you tell us a bit about yourself?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Vinnie, of course. I'm 26 years old and running for the Greens in the seat of Dickson. Yeah, sure. Go on.
Why did you choose to run for the seat of Dickson with the Greens party in a marginal seat?
Yeah, so for me, I'm an environmental scientist. I graduated uni a few years ago. And, one thing that became abundantly clear is that we have so many of the solutions to act on climate change and give ourselves a healthy world and healthy environment. But at the moment, it's government that's getting in the way of that. Mm-hmm. And realistically, when I, looked at the parties and what they're offering as far as climate, no one comes close to the Greens. And for me, I felt like a really productive use of my time was to get involved in the movement to try and help push, climate action in the right direction. Mm. And, for many reasons, but predominantly that for the Greens were the party that I chose best aligned with me. So I put up my hand as a candidate and have been really enjoyed speaking to the community and advocating for better solutions around climate change, particularly.
Yeah. What are some of your major ambitions and plans to actually win the seat of Dickson?
Yeah. So this election is certainly a focus on the Senate above all else, right? So of course, across Queensland, everyone will be voting collaboratively to elect a new senator. So what we're saying at the moment is that we're looking for a 1.5% swing in this election. And that will be enough to kick out Pauline Hanson and put in a second Green senator. Yeah. So that's what we've been talking about across the whole state and here in Dickson as well. Mm-hmm. It's an uphill battle, of course, for the Greens to be able to win the seat of Dickson this time around. But we're actively campaigning, looking to grow our vote, and really focusing on our potential successes in the Senate.
Yeah. Well. Dickson is quite a large seat geographically. How will you make sure everyone receives your message?
Yeah. So, of course, most of the population's kind of in that eastern area, close to Gympie Road. But, of course, the geography spreads out really far to the west. You're right. I myself am based in Dayborough, so out in the western side. So we've definitely been trying to stay active in our campaigning in this western side, attending market stalls, getting out and dropping off letters, things like that. Yeah. But of course, when it comes to us speaking to, a more dense pool of voters, our visibility on the eastern side in the more dense suburb has definitely been where we've spent a lot of our focus. But, it's the reality that there's a lot of seats that do have a mixture of suburban or urban areas and more rural regional areas. And we have to be really mindful of that when we talk about what people want and what we aspire to advocating for.
Yeah. Why do you think you should be the next federal member of Dickson? Dickson, yeah.
Yeah. I think it's less about me as a person. I think it is more about the fact that at the moment, the two major parties, LNP and Labor, I think people are just generally sick of the representation that they're seeing, and particularly how that's influenced by corporate donations, and that more and more people see the parties as very similar to each other, which has got people looking for alternatives outside the two major parties more and more and more. So I think that the Greens particularly are best suited to represent the will of the people and, have science-driven, evidence-based policy to be able to reflect that. Me, myself, as a scientist, a young person, and someone with a lifelong disability, I feel like I'm in a good position to be able to listen to the community, hear what their main problems are, and collaborate with the Greens Party to be able to come up with policies that best reflect that and solve really, deep problems.
Well, there is a lot of focus on Peter Dutton and what he did as Home Affairs Minister in terms of refugees. What do you make of that? And do you believe the Greens would do better?
Yeah, I think that refugee policy has become one of the poison chalices for the last 20 years, right? Like the LNP particularly have made such a point of making us feel like we need security and protection at all costs about anyone seeking asylum. And the reality is, it is a breach of human rights, many of the policies that we have towards refugees, asylum seekers. And unfortunately, Labor's adopted very similar policies across the board, I think out of fear that the scare campaigns around refugees coming here are something that they have to pivot to not lose votes. But we're very strong about the fact that we need compassionate grounds. We need to be adhering to our responsibilities as per human rights to be able to allow people to seek refuge. That's not to say that we shouldn't have things in place to make sure that people are coming here with good intent. No doubt about that. But it really feels like we've tried to make an example of refugees and really treat them abhorrently to do so. So we're very firmly against the refugee policy of both the major parties over the last 20 years or so.
Yeah. Well, we know that the LNP is focused on the nation's economy, while Labor draws its attention to fixing aged care in their budget reply. The Greens, what are they focused on, and how will they target all ages and voters?
Yeah. So, I mean, there's a whole suite of policies, right? The budget addresses every single thing, but at the heart of our policy suite, we're putting climate, housing, education, and health at the very core tenet of it. So, we're saying that we need to be investing in a green new economy into the future by investing into having 100% publicly owned renewable energy by 2030. We think it makes sense as far as action on climate change and actually invests heavily into many new jobs and infrastructure into the future. So we think that's a really strong component of any budget focused on addressing climate change. And I guess the other predominant one is trying to tackle the housing crisis, essentially. As young people, where basically many of us have given up on the idea of buying a house. I know it's not really something I particularly aspire to anymore because it just feels so out of reach. And there's bits and pieces, there's tinkering around the edges that the major parties are doing to try and incentivize the ability to buy a first home for young people and people in general, but it does not address the core systemic issues that, in this country, we have decided that housing is a commodity, that rich people, I'm talking really rich people, can get even richer off leveraging our housing supply as a for-profit component. And the basic idea that everyone should have a roof over their house does not seem like the central tenet of our housing policy anymore. So we're talking about the fact that, not going after mum and dad investors, not going after people who just own one investment properties or anything. We're talking, big property developers, that we shouldn't have negative gearing and capital gains tax policies that really do deeply benefit them. And by winding back some of those tax codes, that we will be able to afford to build 1 million affordable homes across Australia over the next 20 years, both to allow for a massive increase in social housing and to allow for cheap housing stock to be purchased by I guess particularly young people or people entering the market for the first time.
Yeah, well, we know that those housing costs have been soaring in the past 2 years. Do you think that you will win over first-year voters and the majority of young Australians because they are focused on things like climate change and housing?
I think so. I think that more and more, young people are looking at the policy suite of how this is going to affect them over the next, 50, 60 years. We have a long life ahead of us.
Yeah.
And, the next generation as well, that the reality is we need more and more young people in Parliament who do have that laser focus on how, it really is important that we have policies that account for decades in the future, not just these short-term football games that it feels like the major parties are playing. So to me, I feel really inspired when I speak to other young people because they are really on the ball about, things that we need to be acting on for a better world, for a fairer world. And, I feel like we've got a more politically engaged youth than ever. And I'm really proud that we have policies that I think speak most to that demographic. Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, we know that the seat of Dickson is a highly contested seat. Peter Dutton for the Liberals and Ali France for the ALP. Where do you see yourself after a decision is made on election night, and what happens if votes don't go your way?
So again, we're going to be focusing predominantly on the result in the Senate across the whole state. So, we have to work our tails off here to make sure that we contribute to that Senate vote. But that's going to be our main focus above all else. But of course, we would love to see Peter Dutton lose his seat here. I think, for many, he's emblematic of a lot of the, really horrid parts of the LNP that I think voters have turned away from over the last decade, the last 3 years in particular.
Yeah.
And, we're being very vocal, very strong about the fact that we want to work in a power sharing agreement with the Labor Party. We want to be in balance of power with the Labor Party. And we think that the priority is kicking out this, frankly, corrupt and rotten LNP government that we have at the moment, and being able to work in balance of power to keep the Labor Party accountable in the next term of government. And that's a message that really resonates with people. Even Labor voters, I think, like the idea of accountability and more progressive values in the name of the Greens to be able to work collaboratively with the Labor Party and, break down this two-party dominant majority system that we've been dealing with for so long now.
Yeah. Finally, is there anything you want to say to the people of Dickson who are watching this?
Yeah, I think that, the last 3 years have shown us that it really does matter and does affect so many people who is in government. Sometimes it feels like it doesn't matter. Sometimes it feels like there's no difference and that you shouldn't even pay attention, or even that life in Australia is generally pretty comfortable, pretty good. You don't have to worry about it. The reality is that we need to be working together as a community to be able to take strong action on climate change and to be able to make sure the world is a fair and equal place for every individual into the future. Because, we do not want to see inequalities already so big widen even further. We don't want to see homelessness go up. We want to see our kids and people our age being able to afford homes. And we want to see a clean, healthy world where we can continue to live as a species and, protect the environment and other species as well. It's a responsibility of us all. And the reality is that being involved in our democracy and voting and volunteering and talking to people around you about these issues, nothing could be more important. And we really do need to see a shift, particularly getting rid of this government. But that's not the answer. Electing in the Labor Party is not the answer. It's certainly a better alternative, but we need to shake things up. We need more variety and diversity within our parliament. And we need people to feel like they should be inspired and have trust and faith that democracy actually works for them and has their best interests at heart, instead of, what we see at the moment, which is legitimately the major parties pandering to their corporate donors, accepting money and donations, and their policies reflecting who they're coming from, and people feel more and more disenchanted that democracy is actually about representing them. Well, it's our democracy. It's every single person's democracy. and we need to feel ownership over it. But that means we need to fight for it, which is what I'm doing.
Yeah. All right, we'll leave it there. Vinnie Batten, Greens federal candidate for Dickson, thanks so much for your time today.
Thanks, Roman. All the best, mate.
Of course, you can let us know your feedback. Just use the hashtag 6newsau on social media or email us your feedback. contact@6newsau.com. Thanks for tuning in to our first spin check. I'll see you next time.